As some of you probably know, the name of this presentation is What's in a Name? Of course, that's Shakespeare, in case you... And the rest of it goes, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Thing is, I think Shakespeare got it wrong, you know. Names are important. And you know, even in his own play, Romeo and Juliet both died because of their names, you know. I mean, you can't say it's an inconsequential thing. So, you know, so we're going to look at names and how they got to be where they are and how some of them changed along the way. And I hope to make this just a little bit audience participation too. For example, who does get to name things? Who gets to name things?
First one depends on what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. People, of course, name things, but you know, which people? I heard someone say first person on the scene. Yeah, the explorers definitely get first dibs on naming things. And the other ways things get named, or how they get named, or where the names came from.
Well, the indigenous people. For sure.
Good, absolutely, yes. Because they have first dibs on it, actually, but they end up on the losing end of that stick very, very often. And their names kind of get lost. Here in Washington, we do pretty well with that. We've got a lot of tribal names scattered amongst our geographies, so that's nice. But Canadians do an even better job because they've been systematically going through all their place names that were formerly having first persons, or they call them first people in Canada. And so, for example, Queen Charlotte Islands, anyone familiar with that? Mm-hmm. It's up on the same coast we share with the Pacific. And it used to be called Queen Charlotte's, and now it's called Haida Gwaii. That's what the Canadians have given back the original name to it. But, you know, as we all know, names aren't permanent. They can get changed. Take the Gulf of Mexico, for example.
Oh, God.
Okay.
He's dumb.
That's my humor for today. Okay. Other things happen. Let's see. It makes a big difference what nationality is doing the discovering, because obviously the English are going to give English names, the Spanish are going to give Spanish names, the Russians will give Russian names, and the Americans will give American names, which are in many cases different from the English names. In fact, those nationalities I just mentioned are the primary nationalities that were responsible for naming things in this part of the world. Everything from English, Spanish, Russian, Native American, and U.S. Americans. Yeah. So what do two things get named for, though? How would you decide what you're going to name something? The audience participation question. What kinds of things are places named for?
What would they look like? Some visual significance?
Okay, a descriptive name.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's a big point, you might name it Big Point. You know, if there's a swift river, you might call it Swift River, Green River, Colorado. Red River, yeah. So those are descriptive names.
To honor someone.
To honor somebody.
To honor themselves.
Okay. Put yourself in the place of an explorer, and it almost probably gets tedious after a while if you're exploring, because everything is new, so everything needs a name, and you keep kind of having to think up things. And they face this problem. So if you're an explorer, where are you going to get the names? You know, after a while you start scratching your head and digging really deep. You know, I remember the guy that lived down the street from me. Oh, we'll call this island after him. You know, it can get that trivial sometimes. But you know, a lot of things they used commonly were things like the name of their ship. A really good one and a big one was people that sponsored them. If they came on a ship, somebody paid for that ship, someone supplied that expedition, and they owed their livelihood to this person. So it made sense to kiss up to them as much as you possibly could, and they did indeed.
Or
in
an
fact-
incident that happened, such as Dismal Point, where Lewis and Clark had such a terrible
Oh.
experience.
Sure.
Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
I wrote a few down here just to remind myself, and I said people or their ships, VIPs back home, friends, a lot of friends. There's a book in our little library here called Pen Cove and a Particular Friend, if I recall the title, something like that.
Or now we'll name it a stadium after Telecom or something.
Sure. And then depending on what nationality you are, it also shapes what you might call things. For example, the Spanish were really big on naming things after saint names. So if they were traveling to a particular place that was brand new, and they would look at their religious calendar and see this was St. John's Day. I didn't just make that one up, because if you go up into the San Juan Islands, which means St. John Islands, they were named not for the Strait of Juan de Fuca or anything like that, like some people assume, but instead it was named for a saint day, and that's what they did. And there was a lot of Spanish places named for religious events and people. And one of my favorites, though, is sometimes names come up from mistakes. This is one that most people know. Nome, Alaska? No, I don't. I see blank looks. Oh, I thought everyone knew that. Okay.
I know where it is.
You know what it is, but why is it called Nome? Well, when they were charting it out and marking it on the map, they didn't write very clearly, and everyone thought they left a blank space for where the name would go, but it looked like Nome, and so that's what it became. There was a blank spot on the map. That was it. Okay, so that gets us to my next point, which is I was going to talk mostly about names, but I kind of discovered as I was preparing for this that the names are kind of pointless if they're not in a historical context. And so that got me looking into the historical context. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is history, and not always specifically names. But the names fit into the context of that history. And if you don't know some of this history, the names don't make any sense at all. So, for example, why the heck did people even come here? People don't understand that here in Washington State, British Columbia, this is the oldest temperate part of the globe to ever be explored. This was the total wilderness of its day. I mean, people in England didn't know anything about this part of the world. That's why ships ultimately came here, because they wanted to get the last corners of the world taken care of. I mean, there were places in the middle of Africa and South America that people didn't go to yet, but as far as accessible by water and so forth, this place was totally undiscovered. In fact, it was so remote that when Jonathan Swift was writing his famous book Gulliver's Travels, you all remember the Lilliputians, the little guys?
Yeah.
Lilliput was actually down by Australia, according to Swift. It's a made-up place, of course, but That's where he put it, because it was extremely remote in those days, and they barely knew anything about Australia at that time. He also had another part of the book which was called Brobdingnag. Anyone know what that was about? It's the exact opposite of the Lilliputians. They were giants.
Oh, the giant.
Giants. And there's a land of the giants called Brobdingnag. And it was positioned right here, because Swift knew that this was one of the last corners of the world to ever be explored. And so when he's going to write his fictional story, he put it in Brobdingnag right here, and he drew a little map that went with the book. And one of the things it had on this map was a strait, a strip of water that led inland, and it was called the Straits of Anian. I don't know where he got it, and most people don't know where the name comes from, but it is a legend for going way back that there's a deep strait in the northwest that goes all the way through the continent and ends up on the east coast. You've heard it referred to as the Northwest Passage. And this was really desirable to figure out where the heck this thing was, even though it was just a rumor, just a myth. But nobody really knew for sure until you checked it out. So a lot of the explorers that were sent to this area were sent looking for the Straits of Anian. They were also chasing it because there was another fella by the name of Apostolanus Valerianus. It's easy for me to say. He was a Greek sailor, and he sailed for the nation of Spain, which was a very big-time country in those days. Spain and England, those were the big two. And so this guy, Apostolanus, he was Greek. He worked for the Spanish because he was a good seaman. And he had a nickname. His nickname was, strangely enough, familiar to you, Juan de Fuca. And he was sailing in this region in the 1500s, which is way, way back. And for that reason, we know almost nothing about him, and everything we do know is kind of shady, so there's no certainty of it. But the weird thing about it is, when he told the story to some English people, he got it right. It was the Straits of Anian were supposed to be at 46 degrees latitude, or maybe 45, I can't recall. But it was 1 degree off in his version, so inconsequential. He said once you go through it, it opens up into big waters, and then you could go all the way to Europe. Well, that part obviously wasn't true, but it does open up. Once you get past the San Juan Islands, you open into the Straits of Georgia. Depending on the weather, you can't see the other side. So a lot of things about his story turned out to be true. There's a big, very vertical rock at the entrance to the Straits of Anian, as they were called. They were not yet called Juan de Fuca. He didn't name it. So then we get to the more purposeful things. And the Spanish, as you know, claimed the entire Pacific Ocean. When Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama, he got to the Pacific. He could see water everywhere. He knew it was a big body of water, and he claimed all the lands touching this big body of water. I don't think he knew how big it was, because it's North and South Pacific covered a lot of territory. But nonetheless, Spain was more than happy to follow up on that claim and use it as their justification for owning everything. And they did. But now once they owned it, they had to explore it. And they had, after Balboa did his thing, the Spanish were big time in Mexico. They established a naval base in San Blas, Mexico, which is on the Sea of Cortez. It's a very tiny little town right now, but back then it was a big deal place. There was a famous poem written about it, the Bells of San Blas. But in any event, from San Blas, they sent a whole series of expeditions north to explore the coast of the areas that were hitherto unknown, and the one that got the furthest was a Spaniard by the name of Perez, and he got up to about 54 degrees latitude, 40 degrees, 40 minutes, and turned around, came back. Half his crew died on the way because they got scurvy and died. That's the way it was in those days. Being a seafarer in the days before they knew how to deal with scurvy, it was a terrible thing, because literally half the crews would die, and sometimes even more. And so, in any event, he went all the way up there. He went by a place on Vancouver Island, because he went all the way north, and that's it. Most people don't know this place, but it plays probably the most important point in all of Northwest history. And it's right there. It's called Nootka Sound. Is that familiar to anybody? There you go. Some people know about it. Good things. Yeah. Okay. Nootka Sound is where all the history of the Northwest begins. Okay. Perez went by. He stopped very, very briefly. Never went in. Talked to the Indians who came out in canoes and then went on his way. Okay. Later on, the British sent their explorers to the area, and the primary one of those was Captain James Kirk. No, that was Cook. Cook, that's right. Yes. Though actually, that's what he was named after. If you know your Star Trek, Captain James Kirk was named after Captain James Cook, and Cook made 3 voyages to the Pacific. First one, he went to see an astronomical event where Venus would cross the sun, and the astronomers aboard, and they set up observatories and did all kinds of fun stuff. Second one, they wanted to look for Australia and all the things that were in that area that were unknown to them. And they also went down as close to Antarctica as they could possibly get. One of my favorite stories involves the Northwest. Serving on Cook's ship as a midshipman was a young kid by the name of George Vancouver, who you may have heard of, and we'll talk more about him later, but when they got as far south as they could possibly go, because ice and such got in the way, they turned around. But before they got all the way turned around, little George Vancouver, who was about 10 years old at the time, scampered out onto the bowsprit and hollered out, "Ne plus ultra." Smart kid, it's Latin. It means this is as far as you can go. In other words, he was saying, basically he's bragging. He's saying, I'm further south than anybody in the history of the world. And he was mostly true, yeah, because no one else had ever gotten in that far south. And being on the bowsprit, he was further than anybody else. So, yeah, kind of an interesting thing, a little side thing. Yeah. So, but the third voyage of Cook was the one that impacts us the most. And I'm going to go over here. Right here, Cape Flattery. I wish I had a map that showed more of that, but I'd have to have a whole world map to show all the things I wanted to talk about. But the Washington coast goes down from there, like that. And Cook had just explored parts of the South Pacific and was now coming up here, looking for the Straits of Anian. By the way, Cook thought it was a bunch of BS, pardon me. He didn't think there was such a thing. He thought it was a waste of time. But he had orders, so he did, and he went up. And on this particular day, he got up as far as Cape Flattery. It looked like an interesting place. It looked like there might be a harbor behind it even. So he said he was flattered by the expectation that there might be a harbor there. But unfortunately, the weather was turning. And if you're in an old-fashioned sailing ship and the winds are blowing you towards the shore, and the weather is bad, you may not be able to sail against those winds, and you may be pushed onto that shore and wrecked. So he didn't consider it safe to be where he was, and so he moved from Cape Flattery outward until he was out of sight of land, continued north until he got up to where Perez had seen Nootka Sound, because he was aware of that from the records. And when he got there, he had his ship outside of the entrance to Nootka Sound, right in this area. And remember we talked about Nome being an error in names. Well, Nootka Sound got its name by an error as well. The Indians of the area came out to greet him in their canoes, and he was looking for a way to get in to park his ship safely. And the Indians were saying, "Hey, go around, which in their language was Nootka, Nootka. So they thought they were being told the name of the place, but instead they were just getting instructions to park their vessel. There's another version of that. I'm not sure which is true. The go around is correct, but it also described a dance that the Indians did, which went around. And apparently there were native folks doing a dance on the beach there, and they may have been pointing to that too. Who knows? But nonetheless, Nootka means go around, and so that's
Hey Dick, while this truck is here, you want to use the microphone because I'm having a hard time hearing you over here. So the light screen is on.
1, 2, 3. We're here. Okay. So Nootka becomes important, but the why of it is another interesting thing. The Spanish settled there. They put a little fortification there. They stationed a couple of ships there and established themselves. Meanwhile, Cook had to continue his voyage, which took him up to Alaska and then over to China. And when they got to China, they found out something very interesting that they didn't expect. While they had been at Nootka, they had traded with the Indians for a variety of things, cultural artifacts, etc., but also furs. And the fur that they traded for, and mostly, was sea otters. And that was fine. Most of the crewmen traded, they could take a nail from the ship, hopefully not a crucial one, and trade it for a sea otter skin, because the native folks in this part of the world didn't have any metals to speak of. So they were fascinated by them and prized it extremely highly. So when they got to China, many of the crewmen had a pile of sea otter pelts in their sea chests. And when they got there, they found out that the Russians had been trading with the Chinese for some time in sea otters, and the Chinese had established a really high value for them. Depending on the quality, $50 to $100 each of money of that era. If you do the math, it turns out it's about $1,500 to $2,000 current dollars each. And so for a sailor who was paid next to nothing, that was a lot of money. And it got really raucous aboard Cook's ship because they wanted to go back. We get more of these things. And a couple of people deserted and were never heard from again. This is true. Yes. And but Cook didn't want to do that, so he just spoiled sport. And so they sailed all the way back to England around Cape of Good Hope and all the way back up home. And when they got there, a number of the officers remembered this incident of the sea otter pelts. A number of the enlisted crew remembered the story. And they all were thinking of ways to make money about this whole thing. And so some expeditions were scrounged up, and people went from England back to this part of the world. In fact, before the account of the journey was even done, these expeditions were financed and started. Took about 4 years before the first written description of Cook's voyage came out. They did a thing in those days where when you came back, if you were on the ship and you kept a diary or some sort of log of what you had been doing, the government took it. They confiscated it all. And so that way you couldn't profit from it, nor would false versions of the truth come out. So that's the way it went. However, there was a clever American aboard Cook's ship. One of my favorite guys in all of history. A guy named John Ledyard. He signed on Cook's ship as a Marine. And he very sneakily kept a very complete journal. And he returned to the United States and he wrote a book based on his journal. And it was actually published a year before the one in England because the English took much longer to get it all done. So Americans also got involved in the fur trade because once they heard about this, they all wanted to do the same thing the Brits were doing.
What was the name of the book? What was the name of the book?
Oh gosh,
It's okay.
It's a journal. I've got a book on my shelf, but it's a journal to the Northwest Coast of America, something like that. Yeah, I've got. And now where was that?
I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, okay.
So people were coming to the coast for sea otters.
Yes, they were indeed. From America, from England, and the Spanish, as I mentioned, were already there. And when they started getting there, and they landed at Nootka because that was the place where people were, and that's where the Spanish fort was. And the Spanish all of a sudden decided they didn't want all the company because it was their land, and they started getting snippy about it. And eventually, they actually confiscated several of the British ships and shipped them down to San Blas. And it was called the Nootka Sound controversy. And back home in Europe, both Britain and Spain prepared for war. This was no small deal. Both sides were reactivating their fleets, arming up, getting ready to go, and they were going to fight over this little two-building fort in the middle of nowhere, and they were going to fight to the death over it, apparently. And finally, of course, saner heads prevailed, and they made a treaty, and nobody ended up having to be killed in the process, so that was a good thing. And the Spanish agreed to withdraw, and this created a bit of a problem because they didn't really quite explain what they meant by withdraw. But in any event, the treaty was written in Europe, and Captain George Vancouver of the British was sent to this area to finalize the deal. He was to come to Nootka and sign the papers with the guy that was in charge there, a fellow named Quadra. And Quadra was a nice fellow, apparently. He and Vancouver got along very well when he got there. And in fact, Quadra actually named Vancouver Island, but he didn't name it Vancouver Island. He named it Quadra and Vancouver Island. Come on to Fuca. Come by, around the corner, all the way to here. This is Dungeness Spit right here. Speaking of names, that's in England, Dungeness Spit. There is one there. It's on the Straits of Dover, and they named it that because it looked a lot like the other Dungeness spit. So that's another reason when names get applied. Continued on and got down here to Discovery Bay. Right here. Whoa, we're getting taken off here. Okay, this is an interesting spot. Vancouver had two ships in his little entourage. He had his ship was named Discovery, hence the name of the bay. They named it after the ship. The other one was the Chatham, and it was in charge of a lieutenant by the name of Broughton. And the two ships had sailed in concert all the way from England, every now and then separating, but always eventually kind of getting back together again. And here's a bit of trivia that has absolutely nothing to do with names. The Broughton ship, the Chatham, was famous for a couple of things. He named a group of islands down in the South Pacific, the Chatham Islands. But it was also famous because his ship, the Chatham, had the highest rate of venereal disease of all the ships in the British Navy. just in case you want to
Places
wow
to
somebody
avoid.
the next time.
Thanks for the tip.
Did they bring it with them or did they get it here?
That's a good question. I was not sure about that.
Both, yeah.
There's actually, this is a side trip. It used to be that the venereal diseases were blamed on the Western Hemisphere folks. When Columbus and all those people came here, they brought it back. But more recent research indicates that no, they had it in the other side of the world long before. So where it came from, I don't think we can really say. But.
Adam and Eve.
All right. Now, okay, there he is. There's Vancouver. I'm going to take you on a real quick jaunt because we're getting to the end of Vancouver, my time and Vancouver's trip here. But here we go. He anchored his ship right here in Discovery Bay. This was 1792. And from here, they got in their rowboats, and rowboats in those days were quite large, 30 feet long or so, and a dozen or so sailors rowing. And this is how they did most of their surveying. They get in the rowboats, and then they charted and mapped things as they went. And what they did was they rowed down here, past Port Townsend, down through here, and down to Hood Canal, and all the way down to right about in this area right here, the Hood Canal. Then when they got as far as where they could tell it wasn't going anywhere, they turned around and went back. So they turned around and went back. Meanwhile, the Chatham is still here, and Vancouver, having seen that this entrance here, Admiralty Inlet, he saw that it goes on beyond where he was, so he wanted to explore that. So he went down this way and anchored right off modern day Seattle, where Blake Island is. Where am I?
Right, off West Seattle.
Yeah, right in there. And meanwhile, Broughton in the Chatham was up here, and we can see it here. He sailed across this bit of water and went up and explored the San Juan Islands. First excursion into the San Juan Islands. And he went all the way through the San Juans, and then he came back down with the goal to meet up with Vancouver, wherever the heck he might be. But here's what happened. Vancouver went down here, he anchored right there off Blake Island, and then he sent Puget. Puget was his lieutenant. He had 3 lieutenants aboard. One was named Puget, one was named Baker, and one was named Mudge. The leader of them all was Mudge. Yet he has fewer things named after him. But By the way, I haven't mentioned Whitby at all. How about that? We'll get to that. Okay, so Vancouver said to Puget, I want you to take the boats and continue on down the sound, because it was getting a little smaller down that way, and it's more convenient to leave the big ship where it was rather than try to work it through the various small places. So Puget went down for a couple of weeks down into the lower sound, charting it all as he went and naming things on the way, etc. Mount Rainier, for example, along the way, etc. Actually, technically Puget didn't get to name things, but he did get to recommend things, and then Vancouver named them. But okay, so when he returned to where the Discovery was off Seattle, which wasn't Seattle then, of course, Vancouver was pleased with what Puget had done. And so he said, we're going to name this Puget Sound. Which is interesting because at that time then, Puget Sound was Seattle and south. So what we call Puget Sound is a much bigger area now. In fact, sometimes this area right out here is sometimes reckoned to be part of Puget Sound. So, okay, so that became Puget Sound. So Vancouver moved his ship, and now one of the things they were looking for, they knew that the Strait of Juan de Fuca didn't go to the east coast, but they thought there still might be a place if you turn right as you're heading north. There's going to be a place that you can go up that channel, and you keep going. Next thing you know, you're going to be in New York. It obviously didn't turn out that way, but there were instructions to do exactly that. So they wanted to hug the right-hand side of things as they went up. And so they went up here, inside the end of Whidbey Island, right here, and then right up over here, which, as we can see from the map, it don't go anywhere. It ends right here. Interestingly enough, when they went up here, the Chatham went ahead and ran aground. And it wasn't bad seamanship, because the guy that was in charge of keeping charge of the depth, throwing a lead line, he was faking it. It's a lot of hard work throwing that line and bringing it in and throwing the line and bringing it back in. It's heavy. And
One job.
so one job, that's it. Well, so in any event, they went aground. The guy got a couple of lashes on the back, which was typical punishment for that kind of stuff. And fortunately, the tide was right. The tide came in later, floated them off. Muddy bottom there, didn't hurt a thing, so they were okay. So they anchored right in this area here off of what's the Indian tribe over there? Marysville, yeah. Tulalip, yeah, that's it. I knew it was around the tip of my tongue. Yeah. In the waters that are controlled by the Tulalip tribe. And while there, they threw out the boats again. And here's where we get to our local history. Because from right here at the south end of Camano Island, Joseph Whidbey and a fellow named Hanson, who was an enlisted guy from the Chatham, rowed their boats up this way to explore in this area. And they went all the way up to, it's uncertain, but it's presumed to be right up about here. But before they got there, they took a left-hand turn and went up Penn Cove, but just looked for a brief moment and then continued on their way. Then coming back, they spent more time in Penn Cove. Whidbey actually walked across the narrow point here, so we could see that it's a very narrow island at this point.
Libby Road.
Yeah, he walked down Libby Road. I have a friend who went through their front yard. But yeah. And so, okay, and they were very cordial. No one had any issues with anybody. Whidbey thought it was a beautiful area. He loved to be there. Talked about the oak trees and things of that sort. And returned down to his.
But he didn't go through Deception Pass.
No, he did
He
not.
didn't know it was an island.
That's exactly right. That's why he stopped here, because he noticed the passages between Hope Island and these other islands were very small. He never got all the way up to Deception Pass. And so he was right there, turned around. They spent a night on the beach here in Whidbey somewhere. It's no one knows exactly where, but they just didn't go in. Anyway, they moved on. They went around, gathered up all the vessels, came up here, went up over here alongside Cypress Island, and anchored there. Along the way, they had named a few things. We'll mention those right now, since this is about names, right?
I had a question because, see, if they had gone up the channel, they missed Deception Pass, but if they'd gone through the channel, was that open at LaConner and all the way up, which would have made that whole thing an island, wouldn't it?
There's no mention of whether they saw the entrance to LaConner.
But that would have made it an island also.
Yeah, well, it is actually.
2 islands.
Yeah. Yeah, Gwen. Yeah.
They were very tired.
A lot of Fidalgo, my understanding anyway, is that Fidalgo Island was not an island until the Navy cut a channel through it.
Nah,
Wrong?
that's wrong.
That's wrong.
That's
Okay.
wrong.
Oh, so there really was a.
The Swinomish Channel is a real thing. It wasn't
Okay.
always as deep. They dredged it and such, but it's a real thing. So Fidalgo Island is an island. Okay, so what are we doing? Yeah, we're gonna do it. All right.
Actually, there's a sign up there. I was just in Anacortes this weekend. There's a sign saying exactly what she said right up there at
And
the
it says
point.
that's what I said.
Yeah, what she just said. That it was never an island. It was filled in. So where was I? At the new RV park. And then you take the little path out, and they have, their little kiosk with their little sign, and it talks about exactly what she said, that little section was
I don't know how deep it
Yeah.
was originally, but
Yeah.
the natives could canoe it and such like
Well,
that.
I'm just telling you what their sign
okay.
said. Contradicting history.
Could I ask where that sign is?
If you go to the RV park, the very new RV
Yeah,
park
I
in
wouldn't mind-
Anacortes.
Is that by the refineries or?
No, it's right at the marina. So they built a new RV park at the marina in Anacortes.
Okay.
And in there's kind of like a little boat lounge and a little thing, and there's like right down there.
And what's supposed to be there? Was
A little, like,
Was
sign
that the
with-
place where there was a passage?
There's a
What they're
sign
saying,
that
yes, they're
points
saying
to
that
the
that
side.
area was always covered in.
Because that's the only place we could make it an island would be along the Swinomish Channel. But I don't know. I'll check it out because
I
I've
could be
not
wrong
heard
too.
that.
I could have remembered incorrectly.
Okay. In any event, the passage between Whidbey Island and Camano is called Saratoga Passage. Some people know that. Okay. But that's not what Vancouver named it. He called it Port Gardner. All the way up to, he didn't know it at the time, but all the way up to Deception Pass. So that was all Port Gardner. It got renamed by an American group that came through in the 1840s called the Wilkes Expedition. And they renamed a lot of different things. This is a map of the San Juans as done by the Wilkes Expedition. And every island almost has a different name than you're probably used to if you've been through the San Juans. Rogers Island is San Juan Island, Chauncey Island, Hulls Island. So none of those are familiar because names don't get kept. People change them. They keep what's comfortable. I'm not sure if we'll ever have a Gulf of America, but it just depends what people end up being comfortable with. All right. Speaking of, let's see, we get over there. Oh, okay. Here's a non-name story. When they got up to Cypress Island up here, blocking the people on the other side. Oh. Yeah. And that's not okay. Just north of Anacortes is Cypress Island, and they anchored off of that, But before they got there, the Chatham got caught in the current and was being swept up Cypress Channel. And they threw out their anchor to stop their uncontrolled rush up the channel, and which was a good idea, except the rope broke. And so they lost their anchor there, and they tried for a couple of days to drag the bottom for it, but without success. So somewhere in the channel up there, to this day, is a big anchor from the Chatham.
Wow.
And people have been trying for a long time to locate it, but no one's ever been successful.
Was Chatham also up in Alaska?
The Chatham did go to Alaska, yes.
It seems like there was some channels or something up there that I was kayaking around. Anyway. Okay.
Okay. All right. So before I wear everybody out completely, I'll do one final little thing, and then we'll call it quits. Up in the San Juans, I think I'm gonna abandon this guy. Yeah. Okay, Harrow Strait right here. Rosario Strait on the other side. Who's ever heard of the Pig War?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the importance of the two straits. At one time, for those who don't know the story, I'll do it real fast. The islands were subject of an almost war between the United States and Britain. And we were under a period of what was called joint occupancy. Britain and the United States both could be there. They could buy land, they could farm, they could do whatever they wanted. And they weren't British, they weren't American, they were both or either, however you want to look at it. But that worked, and then it didn't work because the British fortified one end of the island, the Americans fortified the other end of the island, and in the hassle of all that, a pig crossed into a farm and got shot, and hence it's called the Pig War. It all got solved because they didn't want to fight about it, and they had the Kaiser of Germany settle the whole thing for us, which is kind of weird, but that's the way it happened. And the issue was the main channel between the two bits of land here, over here or over here. And the Kaiser looked at the map and said, that's the main channel, that's the Straits of Harrow. But where did these names come from? Where does Harrow come from? Good question. Where does Lopez come from? Well, I already mentioned San Juan, so you all remember that because the quiz will be later. So. All right, so, and Orcus, there's a good one. What's Orcus named after?
It's named after a person, not named after the whale.
That's correct. Good for you. You get a star
I
for
read
your
about it
day.
recently.
Okay. All right. If I jump quickly back to Vancouver here, he's anchored here by Cypress Island. Later they explore further north, and when they get up here, remember it's still 1792. Right in this area off Vancouver, in the city, Vancouver runs into two Spanish ships. And boy, was he PO'd. He really was. He thought he was the first one to ever be in any of this part. And here he finds out that the Spanish are there. They're actually ahead of him up in there. And they're doing more or less the same thing he's doing, is naming things and finding things and exploring, et cetera, et cetera. And turns out, not only were they ahead of him in 1792, they had done an exploration in 91 as well. There had been a Spaniard by the name of Eliza who brought his ships into Victoria area, and then with smaller boats and whatnot had explored around the outer perimeter of the San Juan Islands and gone all the way up here as far as Texada Island. So Vancouver was not the first up in this part of the world. On the positive side, no Spaniard had ever been into the lower sound through Admiralty Inlet, so he was definitely the first there. And in fact, not only was 1791 not the first area, they also had a Spanish expedition in 1790. And that first expedition just explored this area right here. One of the things they discovered was something they call Boca de Flan. Mouth of, yeah. And then I read once that it meant mouth of the flow. However, subsequent research shows me that there is no Spanish word flan. So what they were referring to, I have no idea. I was always confused about how they could call it the mouth of the flow because they didn't get close enough to see the flow. So in any event, so we had 3 Spanish expeditions in this area. And, oh, by the way, on the way by, when they went by here before, Vancouver did, Whitby jumped out in the boats, rode through Deception Pass, and back to pretty near where they were when they came up the other side. And in the process, he finally realized that this was an island and not a long peninsula. And hence the name, Deception Pass, because he was deceived.
First time.
Yeah. So the first time they didn't get up to know what was going on, but the second time we went through, then it was real. Okay. All right. Now the Spanish names. The first explorer here was named Lopez de Haro. Okay. So Lopez Island, Haro Straits. My favorite is Orcas. As you correctly said, it's not named after the whale, nor is the whale named after the island. I have to read this because Spanish names are sometimes, I may not pronounce this right, but Spanish aristocratic names are quite long. This was,
Excuse me. Can you wait for the truck to go by?
I can.
Use the microphone.
Or use the microphone?
Use the microphone.
Okay. He's, there we go.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. When the Spanish took over Mexico, the Mexico region, they put a person in charge who's called the Viceroy. And this is what we call a VIP back home, right? So you want to name things after the VIP back home. Okay, this was the VIP. Juan Vicente de Güemes Pacheco de Padilla Porcasitas Segundo Conde Revilla Gagedo. Okay, that was the name. Yes. Yes, yeah. There's in that name, if you caught it, there's Güemes, which now is Güemes Island. When Vancouver passed those 2 Spanish ships, they named these things, and Vancouver was gracious enough to allow them to remain on his charts as well. Padilla Bay, which is just inside of this area, was also part of his name. And Horcasitas is actually a long version of Orcas, or Horcas. They frequently would drop the H, so it's just the way it was.
And who is this guy with this long name?
He's the Viceroy of Mexico. Yep.
Interesting.
I have a question about
Yeah.
Lake Pondilla in Fort Eby. Is it really pronounced Pondia?
Is it?
Which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here. So I wonder if that
Pondia?
Lake Pondia, I'm in Fort Eby.
How would you?
It's Pondilla. Pondilla.
Yeah, 'cause I was referring to Padilla for Padilla Bay, which is no
Padilla.
end.
Well, okay. But the
Yeah.
proper pronunciation of the one in Fort Eby is Pondia.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's Spanish, yeah, double L, but just usually we should pronounce that way. Yeah. Okay. Well, yes.
Just write the name down.
Okay. Perfect. Close enough.
I got a question.
Questions? Yes.
Who named Penn Cove, Oak Harbor, and Crescent Harbor?
Okay. Penn Cove was named after a friend of Captain Vancouver, and named it after a particular friend, as the book
Vancouver
is.
named it though.
Yes, he did. Even though he didn't come here.
Right.
Yes. And Oak Harbor, I'm not sure when it was named because that came after. And because they didn't leave any names from the expedition. And that's probably true of Crescent Harbor as well. Yeah.